I will start. Hey, welcome to our first Bible study of 1 Peter. Today, what I want to do is spend a portion of our time just introducing the book. And so we're not going to go through a lot of the text. We'll go through the main introduction that Peter has in this, but we're just going to spend a little bit of time introducing this book. So, the Apostle Peter, and it says, is the one who is the author behind this. It says Silvanus at the very end in chapter 5, verse 12, is the one who wrote it. That'd be Silvanus, Silas. If you remember Silas from the book of Acts, Paul and Silas, who went on the missionary journeys, you see him here connected with Peter. And Peter, if you remember, was the fisherman who Jesus called to be one of his apostles. And Peter was one of the central figures of the early church, one of the prominent figures and leaders of the early church. We see him in the book of Acts, the first half of the book of Acts. A lot of it is designated to the ministry of Peter and the early church and the things that he has done. And so we see here in 1 Peter a letter that he is writing. Now, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5, this is an interesting fact. Peter often traveled with his wife when he did his ministry. This was something that the rest of the apostles seemed to practice as well, or at least a portion of the time, because Paul was making comment the fact that he himself didn't, but that Peter and the other apostles did this. So I just find that an interesting thing, just to have that in mind, that Peter is a man who's married, and his wife shared in the ministry that he had. We do not hear much about her at all. The Bible's just silent about her for the most part. We do have a reference to her mother-in-law in the Gospels. But just an interesting thing, I think, sometimes to have a little bit of understanding about the person as we look to read through the writing that they have, this letter that they have written. Now, Peter, as we have studied him, you remember, he seemed sometimes a bit outspoken. He's a very driven and passionate person, but sometimes his mouth got before his mind. He didn't process sometimes what we see. He just spoke. He's quick to speak, quick to act. He's a guy who takes action. These are quality traits when refined and given over to serving the Lord. These are fantastic traits when we refine them and we are going to use them to serve the Lord. And we see that developing. You can see it when you read through the book of Acts in Peter. And you can see that here in his own writing. 1 Peter is actually, it's a very, very thoughtful letter when you read through it. You read through it and you got to stop and think a little bit about what he just wrote. And it's like, woo, that was pretty good. That was pretty deep. You read a little bit more and you stop and think. I'm afraid that sometimes we overlook 1 and 2 Peter because we are so familiar with the Apostle Paul. And we look at his writings, and since 1 Peter's towards the end of the New Testament, I think for many of us, some reason we just don't settle in there. But it is a fabulous book, a fabulous read, and it's rich with theology and doctrine. And this is being written, it says here, to groups of churches. When it says here in 1 Peter chapter 1, the apostle, Peter calls himself an apostle. That's the title that Jesus had given to him. There were apostles in the days of the early church. I do not believe that is anybody in the church today carries the title of an apostle. This is someone very specific who had early connections with Christ. Some people say that to be an apostle, you would have had to have actually seen the resurrected Christ. We understand that Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus. He himself was an apostle. The 11 original of the 12, the original 12, the 11, not counting Judas Iscariot, they're apostles. We see Paul referencing Barnabas as an apostle. And so we understand it wasn't just the 11 or just the 12, but we don't have a set list of all the apostles, but understand it wasn't something that I believe it's not something that's supposed to be continuing on throughout all of church age, that there's this title of apostle. This is something very specific to that day. And so Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, He's writing, he says, to the elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So he's writing to regions. He is writing to these different regions. And we understand as we read through this letter, and also if you read through some background commentaries, or you look at a Bible handbook or something, or even an introduction to a study Bible if you have, you'll find out that Peter is writing to a church that is either undergoing persecution, possibly even under the Caesar Nero, or they are undergoing intense social pressures, which is about to lead to actual persecution. Persecution and the risking of their life or losing their life for following after Christ. The social pressures that are trying to push you against following Christ. The persecution comes when there's actually that immediate consequence to not denying Christ. And there may be the persecution to their lives, and they may end up suffering as a martyr, or other types of persecution, tormenting and being beaten, different things like that, businesses being experiencing great conflict against them because they were a Christian. But Peter is writing to these people in this day, in this setting, and he's writing this letter to give them hope. He's writing this letter as a letter to encourage them. And that's what we're going to see as we go through the book of 1 Peter. We're going to see Peter encourage the people, but also offering some instruction of correction to them. But ultimately, he is writing them with this hope that even in this intense time of social pressure or persecution, we have a hope in Jesus Christ. So looking forward to really diving in, starting tomorrow. I'll see you then.